They say you know who truly loves you when you're no longer useful to them. I used to think love was louder than that. But lately, love has gone quiet in this house. My son Ethan had insisted, "Come stay with us while you recover, Mom. It's your home too." And so, I packed my life into 2 suitcases and a box of my favorite tea bags. I wasn't supposed to stay long. Just until the staples came out, the stitches healed, and I could drive again. Before we begin, do one thing for me. Hit follow. Subscribe. Because this story? It starts with silence, and ends with everything on fire, and when it's over, you'll want someone else to feel what you felt. Share it. Let them know what happens when the woman you called a failure finally speaks. That was 6 weeks ago. It had started with kindness. "Just stay with us a few weeks, Mom. Till you're back on your feet." That's what Ethan had said when he picked her up from the hospital. He'd opened the car door like a gentleman, fussed over her overnight bag, promised her the guest room was freshly painted. Back then, his voice still carried the soft edges of the boy she'd raised alone, the one who used to cry when he lost a sock in the dryer. Now, even his footsteps sounded distant. Margaret sat on the patio, the evening breeze brushing her skin like memory. In front of her, the garden glowed under soft landscape lights, hydrangeas, white roses, and low ornamental grass swaying in choreographed elegance. It was all Vanessa's doing. Designer landscaping, installed last spring. Behind the glass doors, laughter echoed. She didn't mean to eavesdrop. Vanessa's voice just had that tone, sharp, acidic, too loud to ignore. "God, she's still here," Vanessa said. "It's like I'm running a halfway house for broken boomers." A second voice giggled, someone on speakerphone. "No, seriously," Vanessa continued, slicing into an avocado like it had personally wronged her. "I mean, I get that she's his mother, but how long does recovery from stitches take? She literally sits there all day drinking tea and judging my countertops." More laughter. Then, quieter but somehow sharper, "Honestly, I deserve a medal for dealing with this much passive-aggressive energy under my roof." Margaret closed her eyes. Not from pain. From the sheer effort it took not to cry. She'd fought through far worse: cancer, foreclosure notices, nights she'd gone without food so Ethan could eat. But there was something uniquely piercing about being spoken of like an obligation. Like a charity case in orthopedic slippers. She stood up slowly and returned inside. The kitchen gleamed, chrome, marble, and curated perfection. Vanessa looked up but didn't offer a smile. "We ordered in Thai," she said, not really looking at her. "You can warm yours up." "Thank you," Margaret said. No one asked about her day. No one noticed the tightness in her face, or the heaviness in her steps. Ethan was at the table, eyes glued to his phone. His hair was a little thinner than she remembered, and he looked tired. But he didn't look up either. Margaret sat in silence, eating cold noodles that tasted like nothing. She could hear her own breathing, louder than any conversation in the room. Later, in the guest room, she stared at the framed quote above the bed, "Gratitude turns what we have into enough." Margaret almost laughed. The irony was thick enough to choke on. She opened her laptop. It took a few seconds to load. Her connection in this room was slow. Vanessa probably had the Wi-Fi throttled. A familiar login page appeared. She typed carefully. Accessed a folder labeled simply, Backbone. The screen lit up with documents, deeds, shares, holding company certificates. Her name sat quietly at the top of every PDF. For years, she had stayed silent. Let Ethan take credit for building the company. Let Vanessa parade around like the mastermind. Let them live in the house she bought, drive the cars her money maintained, run a business that still bore her unseen signature at the foundation. She had signed it all over once, out of love. But love fades. And now? Now, she was signing it all back. Margaret leaned back against the headboard. The sound of distant laughter drifted through the hallway. Vanessa, again. Talking to someone. Saying something about pride. About people who had no real careers, no real legacy. Just old stories and useless advice. Margaret didn't flinch this time. She closed the laptop gently, placed it on the nightstand, and switched off the lamp. Vanessa thought she was powerless. But the thing about power was, it didn't need to shout. It just waited. Vanessa's mockery echoes down the hallway, no home, no job, just pride. Margaret, in silence, prepares to take back everything. The laughter downstairs wasn't the kind that warmed a home. It was brittle. Too loud. And followed by the kind of silence that made a woman like Margaret pause halfway down the stairs, her hand tightening slightly around the railing. She hadn't meant to eavesdrop. She just wanted water. A short walk to the kitchen. But voices carried in this house, especially when the doors weren't fully closed. "She's still here," Vanessa said, in that tone that always sounded like it belonged on television, not in a family. "I swear, I feel like I'm running a halfway house for emotionally needy retirees." There was a burst of laughter, high, clipped, polished. Another voice chimed in, "You're so bad." "Oh, please," Vanessa went on. "I'm just saying what everyone else is thinking. I mean, how long does it take to recover from surgery?" She just sits there. Watching. Judging. Rearranging my spice drawer like I should thank her for it. Margaret didn't breathe. She didn't blink. She didn't need to. She just listened. "She's always drinking tea like she's above it all," Vanessa continued. "Like some broken-down British monarch. Honestly, I don't even know how Ethan came from people like that." Margaret stepped back, quietly, one foot against the polished wood, slow and steady. She didn't cry. She didn't flinch. Because something deeper had shifted. It wasn't the words. It was the tone. Vanessa didn't speak like someone venting. She spoke like someone rehearsing lines she'd said before. Too many times. With too much comfort. Margaret didn't bother finishing the walk to the kitchen. She turned back, retraced her steps, and made her way to the guest room, that carefully curated spare corner of the house Vanessa had decorated to look like an ad for a hotel chain. Everything beige and inoffensive. Everything silent. She sat on the bed. Took a breath. And then, because she didn't trust herself not to scream, she opened her laptop. The screen lit up slowly. Her fingers moved with purpose. One folder. One login. One click. Documents unfolded like a map. It was all still there. The trust. The shell companies. The real estate holdings. The startup shares that Ethan had once called a lucky break. The company Vanessa now ran. The luxury cars. The home she was sleeping in. She had spent a decade building it. Quietly. Strategically, generational wealth masked as modest estate planning. And they thought she had nothing. That she had no home. No job. Just pride. They had no idea the foundation they stood on had her signature in the concrete. No one had seen her name in years because that's how she wanted it. She had stepped back. Let Ethan shine. Let Vanessa play her part. Let the illusion grow. But illusions don't last forever. And disrespect has a shelf life. She clicked a file marked Emergency Recall Authority. It blinked open, patient and absolute. In the hallway, she could hear Vanessa laughing again. Some line about hydrangeas and how they were the only things in the house more ancient than the guest in the upstairs room. Margaret didn't react. She simply leaned back, whispered to herself, let her laugh, and hit download. Not to hurt. Not for revenge. Just to remember that when people forget what you've given them, it's okay to take it back. Ethan was already in the living room when Margaret came down the next morning. He sat on the edge of the couch, hunched slightly, phone in hand, as if he were trying to disappear into the glowing screen. She paused at the bottom of the stairs, waited. No greeting came. She stepped forward, the soft tap of her cane marking time like a distant clock. Ethan looked up, briefly, then back down. "Morning," she said, her voice calm but stripped of its usual warmth. He mumbled something back, maybe morning, maybe nothing at all. She took the armchair across from him, slowly easing herself down. The silence between them had a weight to it now, not the quiet of comfort, but the kind that fills a space when something is decaying. I heard Vanessa last night, she said evenly. All of her. Ethan didn't look up, his thumb moved across the screen. She was drinking. Margaret raised an eyebrow. That excuses cruelty now? It's not like that, Mom. He sighed, finally setting the phone down. She didn't mean it. She meant it. She's just used to getting away with it. Ethan rubbed his face, the skin under his eyes slightly hollow, like he hadn't been sleeping well. She's under pressure. The firm is growing fast. She's got a lot going on. And you being here. I've been quiet, Margaret interrupted. I haven't asked for anything. I cook, I clean, I stay out of the way, and she mocks me in front of her friends like I'm some inconvenient piece of furniture. She's just stressed, he insisted. It's not that deep. Those words. Margaret froze. Her face didn't change, but something inside her folded up, neatly, like a letter no one would read. It's not that deep, she repeated softly. Ethan must have heard the shift in her voice, because he looked up. Really looked this time. You're overthinking it, he said. You know how she is. I do, Margaret replied. I think the real question is, do you? He opened his mouth, closed it. Looked away again. There it was, she realized. The truth of it. The part he hadn't said out loud but lived with every day. Her son was a man floating in his own life. Not steering it. Just adapting. Shrinking. I remember a little boy who used to cry when the lights went out, she said quietly. He was scared of the dark, but never scared to tell the truth. You're not that boy anymore. And I'm not the kind of mother who raised a man who lets his wife humiliate her in her own house. He winced. You're making it worse. No, Ethan, she said. I'm finally telling the truth. She stood slowly, her knees protested, but her spine stayed straight. I won't stay much longer. Just until the doctor clears me to drive. He looked up, startled. You don't have to go. I do, she said, with a tired smile. And you know it. He didn't argue. He didn't offer to help her pack. He just sat there, surrounded by expensive furniture he hadn't bought, in a house he didn't know was hers. Upstairs, in the quiet of the guest room, Margaret opened her laptop again. The screen still showed the documents from the night before, trusts, real estate, the core licensing rights to the company Vanessa believed she owned. All of it still belonged to Margaret. Not legally to Ethan. Not morally to Vanessa. It had always been hers. She had simply stepped aside. She clicked into a secure folder labeled Executor Access. Her attorney had drawn it up years ago, just in case. She hadn't expected to use it. But silence, even justified silence, has an expiration date. Downstairs, she could hear Ethan walking away, and the echo of Vanessa's voice returning, asking if Mother Teresa finally went back to her quarters. Margaret didn't flinch. She downloaded the asset recall packet and began filling it out. Slowly. Deliberately. Not as a warning. As a promise. Monday morning came with too much sun. The kind of harsh, clear light that made everything feel exposed, every crack in the drywall, every hairline fracture and a smile. Margaret was already dressed before anyone else stirred in the house. A muted navy blouse, soft gray slacks, her pearl earrings. She looked like someone who had a meeting. Because she did. Not that anyone asked. Downstairs, she found the kitchen already humming. Vanessa stood in front of the coffee machine in silk sleepwear, scrolling her phone. A splash of espresso steamed beside her untouched avocado toast. Her face, as always, was perfect, makeup that didn't look like makeup, lips too glossed for breakfast. Oh, she said, glancing up. You're up early. I have an appointment. Vanessa didn't ask what kind. Didn't even fake interest. She just nodded and said, well, just let me know when you're done so I can have the guest room steam cleaned. The housekeeper's coming later this week. Margaret said nothing. Just walked past her. Poured her own tea. Sat at the corner of the dining table and stared out the window as if the garden outside held answers. It didn't. But her lawyer did. The Zoom call began at 9 o'clock sharp. Margaret sat with earbuds in, camera off, while her attorney, a sharp-eyed woman named Mara with a voice like clipped wire, guided her through the reactivation process. It's all still valid, Mara said, glancing over the papers on her screen. Your name is still the primary on the holding trust, your LLC still controls the licensing rights to the tech Ethan's company was built on, and by extension, Vanessa's. Nothing's been transferred out. It's all clean. I never changed any of it, Margaret replied. Didn't think I'd need to. You still don't, Mara said. Unless you want to remind them who actually owns this empire. There was a beat of silence. Margaret didn't smile. But her eyes sharpened. I do. By noon, the necessary paperwork had been filed. Most of it digital, a few strategic freezes on spending permissions, a recall order on the luxury vehicle lease Vanessa used for her executive travel, and a soft legal flag placed on 2 of the properties Vanessa listed as assets on her recent investor pitch. Not a hammer. Not yet. Just a shift in the wind. A reminder. When Margaret returned downstairs, Ethan was home for lunch. He sat at the counter, scrolling emails, a half-eaten sandwich beside him. You doing okay? He asked, not looking up. Better than you think. He glanced at her briefly, confused by the answer, then went back to his phone. Vanessa walked in seconds later, phone to her ear, lips tight. Wait, what do you mean frozen? I just used the card this morning. She stopped mid-step when she saw Margaret. Margaret sipped her tea. Vanessa lowered her phone slowly. Her face was calm. Too calm. Have you touched anything? Margaret raised an eyebrow. Touched? Our accounts. Business accounts. Personal accounts. There's some kind of issue. My company CFO just texted. Something about restricted access. Like errors in the back end. I don't work in your back end, Margaret said, setting her cup down. Maybe call your administrator. Vanessa stared at her for a long second, eyes narrow. I know that look, she said slowly. You're doing something. Margaret smiled, just a little. You've spent so long looking down on me, Vanessa. Maybe it's time to look across. She walked past her, slowly, every step deliberate. Vanessa turned toward Ethan. She's interfering. Ethan looked caught, blinking between the 2 women in his life, one frozen in fury, the other still and unshaken. She wouldn't, he started, but the words died halfway out of his mouth. Vanessa scoffed. She's trying to sabotage me. Margaret turned back at the edge of the hallway. Sabotage implies you built something yourself. Then she disappeared down the hall, each step echoing just a bit louder than necessary. The foundation had shifted. And no one in the house had noticed, until now. The first real crack showed up at 8:14 the next morning. Vanessa's phone vibrated on the nightstand, not a message, but a calendar alert, board call, Q3 forecast, 9 a.m. She swung her legs over the side of the bed, hair still wrapped in a silk bonnet, and muttered something about decaf being the reason hell exists. She padded into the bathroom, brushing her teeth while checking her business account notifications on her phone. And froze. Login error, user not recognized. She blinked. Tried again. Same result. Vanessa pulled the toothbrush from her mouth, spit, and narrowed her eyes. Glitch, maybe. It happened. Fintech systems were clunky on Mondays. She opened the email app instead. And there it was, a single line from her CFO. Did you move the operating funds to a reserve lock? If so, let me know, nothing's processing. She stared at it for a full 3 seconds before dialing. No answer. She called again. Still no answer. She grabbed her robe and marched into the hallway, nearly colliding with Ethan, who was heading to the kitchen in gym clothes. Ethan. He paused mid-step. What's up? Something's wrong with the business account. I can't access anything. The cards are acting weird. The software says I'm not recognized. And Joel just texted about reserve locks. What the hell is going on? Ethan blinked. Did you forget your login? She gave him a look so sharp it could have drawn blood. No. I didn't forget my login. Something's wrong. Margaret appeared at the end of the hallway, calm, dressed, and holding a book. She didn't say anything, just nodded at them as she passed by toward the living room. Vanessa turned to watch her, eyes narrowing. What did you do? She called out. Margaret paused, turned slightly. Pardon? You did something, Vanessa repeated. My systems are down. Accounts are acting up. If you've been snooping. Snooping? Margaret tilted her head, amused. I think you're confusing me with someone who cares enough to guess your passwords. Ethan stepped between them. Okay, let's just, everyone breathe. Vanessa ignored him. This started yesterday. Right after your mother's little appointment. Margaret's face didn't change. She walked to the bookshelf, returned her novel to the second shelf, precisely where she'd found it, then turned to Vanessa. If I were the type of woman who'd interfere, as you so charmingly put it, she said, you wouldn't be standing here with a working phone. Then she walked away. No raised voice. No drama. Just control. And that made it worse. Much worse. Vanessa stood frozen, trying to think, trying to make the pieces fit, but they wouldn't. She called her lawyer. Voicemail. She tried Joel again. Voicemail. Her stomach turned in a way she didn't recognize, not fear, not yet. Something quieter. More humiliating. Uncertainty. She returned to her office, paced, then sat at her desk and stared at her framed degrees. The logo on one had begun peeling in the corner. She reached out to flatten it. Her hand was shaking. At 9:07, the board call started. At 9:14, Vanessa was already lying. We're just undergoing a minor system migration. Standard security protocol. All funds are safe, we're just temporarily restricting certain access points as a precaution. She smiled through the webcam. No one seemed convinced. And at the bottom of her laptop screen, her inbox pinged. New message. Subject, Trust Ownership Transfer, Auto Flag Alert. From Legal Compliance Archive. She opened it. Skimmed. Read again. Then closed the laptop slowly. Her fingers tightened into fists. Outside the room, she heard the sound of Margaret's cane tapping softly against the hardwood floor. Like a metronome. Like warning. Vanessa turned to the window. The garden looked the same. But something had changed. She didn't know what yet. But she would. It didn't take long. By dinner, the mask had cracked. Not in front of Ethan. Not in front of the guests. No audience. Just two women in a silent kitchen, one peeling carrots, the other counting every breath like it might be her last ounce of dignity. Vanessa stood by the wine rack, barefoot, still in her fitted work blouse and slacks. She hadn't changed after the board call. Hadn't spoken more than 3 words since lunch. Margaret chopped vegetables with calm efficiency. Every motion was deliberate, methodical, like a woman who didn't need to raise her voice to take control. That calm, that stillness was gasoline. Vanessa couldn't take it anymore. You're enjoying this, aren't you? Margaret didn't look up. Enjoying what? This. Vanessa gestured vaguely, angrily. Watching me scramble. Undermining me. Playing innocent while you pull levers behind the scenes. Margaret set the knife down, wiped her hands on a towel. Vanessa, she said softly, if I wanted to see you scramble, I wouldn't have stopped with the cars. That landed. Vanessa's eyes flared. She took 2 steps forward, wine sloshing slightly in her glass. You think you're powerful, she hissed. But you're just a bitter, washed-up woman clinging to a past that doesn't matter. You're irrelevant. You should be grateful we let you stay here. Margaret's face didn't change. Not a flicker. And frankly, Vanessa went on, you didn't build anything. You raised a soft man and played savior. You failed your own life and now you're lurking in mine. The silence was sharp. Ethan wasn't home. The staff had left hours ago, and Margaret, who had once walked out of courtrooms with men twice her size trembling, simply tilted her head and replied, I'm not the failure here, dear. She stepped forward, slowly, voice low but undeniable. I'm the founder. Vanessa blinked. What? Margaret brushed past her toward the hall. You should check your founding documents, she said. It's quite the read. She left the kitchen. Closed the door upstairs. Quietly. On purpose. Downstairs, Vanessa opened her laptop with trembling fingers. She typed fast, opened databases, ownership logs, IP agreements. And there it was, Margaret and Lewis, sole founding trust holder. Her chest tightened. She scrolled faster. Subsidiary files. LLCs, licensing agreements. Every line of control traced back to Margaret. Not Ethan. Not her. Margaret. It wasn't a threat. It was history. The knock came fast, 3 hard raps on the guest room door. Margaret didn't flinch. She sat at the small writing desk, calmly placing a bookmark in the novel she hadn't really been reading. The door flew open. Vanessa stormed in, laptop in one hand, eyes wild. What do you mean founder? She snapped. Is this some kind of loophole? Margaret turned to face her. No. It's ownership. You don't own anything, Vanessa hissed. You haven't touched this company in years. Margaret stood. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. I built it. That startup Ethan pitched in grad school? That wasn't a fluke. It was funded, structured, and protected under a holding trust one designed, before either of you knew what an EIN was. You were just the investor, Vanessa shot back. No, Margaret said. I was the foundation, investor, silent partner, and the controlling entity behind the licensing that made your first million possible. You used my resources to expand, then buried me beneath your Instagram captions. You gave that up. I stepped back, Margaret corrected. But I never transferred ownership. That's the part you missed while playing boss. Vanessa faltered. Margaret walked to her desk and pulled out a slim black folder. Inside were 3 sheets, each stamped with a state seal, each bearing Margaret's name, each proving the empire's foundation was hers. You have style, Margaret said, but you built your castle on borrowed land. Vanessa's hand shook. I could fight this. I could take this public. You could try, Margaret said. But it won't end how you think. For the first time, Vanessa looked afraid. Not because she'd been caught. But because she hadn't seen it coming. Why now? She whispered. Margaret picked up her book again. Because I waited for an apology that never came. The marble countertop was cold against Vanessa's palms as she sat on hold with the county clerk's office. After 20 minutes, a woman named Denise gave her the answer. I'm sorry, ma'am. The deed is held in trust under Foundation Enterprises LLC. The trust manager listed is Margaret and Lewis. Vanessa's stomach dropped. The house, the vehicles, the office building, Denise continued cheerfully. All under the same trust. Would you like a copy of the record? No, Vanessa whispered. Thank you. She hung up. For the first time in her adult life, she dropped to the kitchen floor. Knees against tile, hands clenched around her phone. It wasn't one thing. It was everything. The house she bragged about at brunch. Margaret's trust. The Teslas in the garage. Margaret's trust. The glass office tower with her company's logo. Margaret's trust. Her empire wasn't hers. It never had been. She opened her spreadsheets. Margaret's fingerprints were everywhere. Quiet. Patient. Undeniable. Behind her, footsteps. Ethan's voice. You okay? She owns the house. The cars. The building. All of it. Ethan didn't answer. I thought I built something, she whispered. But I was living in someone else's design. She protected us, Ethan said. Even when we didn't know it. Vanessa turned slowly. And you're okay with that? I was never not okay with it, he said. But you made her feel small in her own legacy. For the first time, she saw doubt in his eyes. And it wasn't about Margaret. It was about her. Ethan, she pressed, fix this. Convince her to step back. Or I walk. He didn't answer. And that silence said everything. Later, the three of them stood in the living room. Margaret calm. Vanessa unraveling. Ethan torn apart. Mom, Ethan said, voice shaking, why can't I log in? Why are accounts frozen? Why does the county clerk say you own everything? Margaret met his gaze. Because ownership isn't given. It's declared. And sometimes, reclaimed. Vanessa snapped. You can't just take it back. Margaret shook her head. I never left. Vanessa's voice rose, near hysteria. You'll ruin us. The board, the investors. That bitter old woman saved us more times than you noticed, Ethan cut in. You were too busy polishing the throne you thought you earned. Margaret's voice was steady. Now we decide who we really want to be. Together or apart. I can't live in your shadow, Vanessa muttered. You've never been in my shadow, Margaret said. You've been standing in my name, pretending it was yours. Ethan dropped his head. I'm sorry, he whispered. I want to rebuild. But with truth. Margaret softened. It's not too late to rebuild. But it's too late to pretend nothing's broken. That night, Vanessa tried again. By the fireplace, her silhouette flickered against gaslit flame. I want her out, she told Ethan. Out of this house. Out of the business. Out of our lives. You're asking me to choose. Not between us. Between the past and your future. Ethan's voice was low. She is part of my future, whether you like it or not. She's destroying everything we built. No, he said. She's exposing what you pretended to build. The words stunned her. Just long enough for him to walk away. Margaret was waiting in the hallway, folder in hand. No threats, she said quietly. Just information. Inside, transcripts, board minutes, emails, Vanessa's own voice acknowledging Margaret as architect. Her own signature beneath Margaret's. Why didn't you use this before? Vanessa whispered. Margaret's eyes were tired. Because I believed you'd grow into the power you borrowed. She turned to leave. Paused. You want me gone? Fine. But when I go, I take my name with me. The brunch was Vanessa's idea. Pressed linens, quiche, champagne. Guests enough to disguise the ambush. Halfway through, she smiled sweetly and struck. I love this family. But lately, with financial shifts, old contracts resurfacing. I feel sabotaged. And I worry Margaret may not be in the best place to manage such big things. The narrative was set. Margaret as liability. But Margaret came prepared. From her bag, she pulled a leather folio. Inside, proof. Emails. Transcripts. Her role as architect, documented. One by one, she passed them down the table. Communion. Vanessa's smile faltered. You say I'm unfit, Margaret said. But you accepted my management when it meant capital, not consequence. She looked to Ethan. Remember the loan for your first office? Vanessa called it a gift. It wasn't. It was a structured capital injection. With oversight. Vanessa tried to interject, but Margaret cut her off. You're unraveling. I'm just sitting still. Silence. Heavy. Unbroken. Finally, Margaret rose. She looked at every face at the table. Calm. Certain. This family was built on truth, she said. Not performance. Not vanity. And truth always remains, even when names get erased from speeches. Her eyes lingered on Vanessa. And when the pretending stops, so does the protection. She set her teacup down, perfectly centered on the saucer, and left the table. The room stayed silent long after she was gone. I don't need applause, she said softly. Or thanks. Or even understanding. But I won't let my life, my legacy, be rewritten by someone who only learned how to spell the word ownership after I taught her what it meant. And with that, she left the table. Vanessa stared after her, breathless, cornered. Ethan leaned back in his chair, quiet. And for the first time, nobody followed Vanessa when she stood up to speak. The new office was smaller. No glass atrium, no view of the skyline, just a rental suite in a building with shared restrooms and flickering lights in the hallway. But Vanessa told herself it didn't matter. What mattered was motion. Power. Reinvention. Her lawyer had advised against it. Her CFO had all but begged her to wait. But she couldn't. Not after what Margaret did at that brunch. Not after watching her name, her identity, get stripped away in front of people who used to see her as untouchable. She registered the LLC under a new name, Stride Collective. Leaner. Sharper. Her vision, no more shadows of her mother-in-law. Within days, she'd called every vendor, every contact, every consultant she'd worked with before. Most responded with hesitation. Some didn't respond at all. But a few said yes. Yes, she told herself. This is how you rebuild. But the cracks showed early. The first pitch meeting fell apart when the investor noticed the fine print, technology rights still licensed under Foundation Enterprises, Margaret's umbrella company. The second potential client cancelled after compliance issues were flagged. And then came the letter. Official. Dry. Cruel in its precision. Cease and desist. For breach of licensing. For unauthorized use of proprietary branding. For attempting to transfer intellectual property she never legally owned. Vanessa stood in the middle of her new office, letter in hand, heartbeat thunderous. Her assistant, a nervous grad student working unpaid for experience, hovered near the door. Do you want me to call someone? She asked, small and unsure. No, Vanessa said, voice shaking. I'll handle it. She sat at her desk, alone now, and opened her laptop. She pulled up Margaret's old emails. She read them again. The terms. The conditions. The generosity. She'd accepted it all, years ago, never thinking twice, assuming Margaret would die quietly, and the assets would become hers by default. She had never imagined Margaret would outlive the silence. Across town, in a high-rise office lit by quiet professionalism, Margaret's lawyer placed the signed letter into a file. Do you think she'll fight it? Her junior associate asked. Mara, the lawyer, smiled. She can try. Ethan found out the next day. Vanessa came home late, slammed the door harder than necessary, dropped her bag onto the couch and said only one thing, she's suing me. Ethan blinked. For what? For existing, she snapped. For daring to rebuild something that should have been mine in the first place. He didn't reply. She stared at him, waiting for support. Instead, he said, you broke the contract. You tried to cut corners. She took a step back, stunned. You're siding with her? No, he said. I'm siding with truth. She laughed. But it came out hollow. And it didn't last long. In her office the next morning, Vanessa opened an email from a firm she'd worked with during her peak. The subject line was short, termination of partnership, no explanation. No apology. Just a final sentence, we are uncomfortable proceeding due to unresolved legal concerns with your founding rights. She stared at it for a long time. The silence around her felt like judgment. She picked up her phone, dialed her old assistant. "Get me a meeting," she said. "Anyone still willing to take a call? Anyone who'll listen." But even as she said it, her voice trembled. Because she could feel it now. The walls closing in. The empire collapsing. And somewhere, maybe even inside her, a voice whispering the thing she feared most. "She warned you." Margaret never raised her voice. She didn't have to. Because when truth has been documented, dated, and notarized, it speaks for itself. Her attorney, Mara, laid out the findings like pieces in a chess game. One file at a time. Each with Vanessa's name on it. None of them good. "She's been double-booking funds," Mara said, tapping one folder with a perfectly manicured finger. "Charging expenses to both Foundation Enterprises and her new LLC, while pretending they're separate entities." Margaret didn't blink. "And these," Mara continued, opening a second folder, "are invoices filed under non-existent consultants. Fake people. Fake accounts. She created a shell inside your shell. Intentional fraud? Deliberate. Systematic. And the taxes?" Mara nodded grimly. "If we press, it's criminal." Margaret leaned back in her chair, quiet. Not satisfied. Just sad. She had never wanted to destroy Vanessa. Only to be respected. Protected. Acknowledged. But now? Now the choice wasn't hers. Vanessa had built her world on borrowed land and fake names. And the ground was finally caving in. That night, Vanessa was at her desk, sweat slicking her palms, when the second cease and desist landed in her inbox. Attached was a 41-page dossier. All of it meticulously laid out, line by line, account by account, showing how she had defrauded not just Margaret's holding company, but several clients she had pretended to win through her new startup. She read it 3 times before she stopped breathing normally. The next morning, her lawyer refused to represent her. By the end of the week, a former client filed a lawsuit for misrepresentation. Then the headlines hit, small ones at first, business blogs, a whisper on LinkedIn. Then larger. Founder of Stride Collective accused of fraud, misuse of funds. Emerging startup faces collapse amid allegations tied to hidden benefactor. The worst one came last. Family empire crumbles, daughter-in-law faces indictment after betraying matriarch behind the fortune. Vanessa's face was in the header. A photo from a gala. Smiling. Glossed. Empty. Ethan came home early that day. He found Vanessa in the dark, curled up on the couch, her laptop closed, her phone off, the silence around her louder than anything he'd heard in years. "I tried to fix it," she said, without looking at him. He sat down across from her. "You didn't try. You hid. And you lied." She wiped at her face. "It got out of control." "You took control," he said. "Of something that wasn't yours." I thought I could outgrow her." Ethan looked at her long and hard. Then said, softly, "You didn't need to outgrow her. You just needed to respect her." She didn't respond. He stood. "I'm filing for divorce." Her breath caught. "What?" His voice didn't shake. "I stayed quiet too long. But I won't be complicit anymore. Not in this." Vanessa sat there, shattered. Margaret, somewhere across the city, stood at her ocean view window, watching the tide roll in. She wasn't smiling. Just breathing. The detention center was cold. Not jail. Not yet. Just holding. White walls. Gray floors. A place where titles meant nothing and no one cared how many Instagram followers you once had. Vanessa sat on a metal bench, hands clenched between her knees, her eyes hollow from lack of sleep. Her lawyer had said it was temporary. That her bail would be posted within the hour. But time moved differently here. Slower. Meaner. The door opened with a soft clunk. She looked up, expecting an officer. It wasn't. It was Margaret. Not in pearls. Not in courtroom armor. Just a navy coat. Simple earrings. Hair pulled back like she used to wear it in her early business years. Vanessa stared at her, stunned. Margaret stood silently for a moment, then sat down across from her. No words. Not yet. Vanessa spoke first, voice low and cracked. Why are you here? Margaret studied her. Not with judgment. With something more difficult. Clarity. Because I don't believe in letting people drown when they've finally stopped kicking the wrong direction. Vanessa looked away. So this is, what? A victory lap? No, Margaret said. This is mercy. Once. Vanessa swallowed hard. Margaret slid a folder across the table. There's a deal, she said. My lawyers drafted it. You issue a full, public statement. No spin. No tears. Just truth. You admit what you did. Not just legally, morally. You acknowledge the trust structure, the false claims, the way you treated people on your way up. Vanessa didn't open the folder. And in return? I pull back the most damaging charges, Margaret replied. You stay out of prison. You keep your name, barely. You start over. Clean. Quietly. Vanessa laughed once. Bitter. Why would you do that? Because I believe in consequences, Margaret said. But not annihilation. And because Ethan still loved the woman he thought you could be. Not the one you became. Vanessa's eyes filled, but she didn't let it spill over. Margaret stood. She looked down at the woman who had called her a failure. Who had taken everything, and still wanted more. And she said, softly, but with no uncertainty, next time, respect failure. It builds empires. Then she walked out. No turning back. No permission needed. The ocean was still. Margaret sat on the back porch of her new home, a modest cottage by the coast, all weathered wood and salty wind. No marble floors. No champagne brunches. Just the rhythmic hush of waves and the occasional cry of gulls overhead. She was alone, but not lonely. A fresh cup of tea steamed beside her, untouched. In her lap was a leather-bound journal. The kind with real paper. The kind you write in when you're no longer afraid of being forgotten. She opened it slowly, then wrote across the top of the page, how to be a failure, and win. She smiled. Not the sharp smile of revenge, but the quiet one of release. Inside the house, wind chimes moved gently in the open window. The living room was filled with soft light and second chances. Photographs lined the mantel, not of wealth or milestones, but of people. Real moments. Her and Ethan on his 5th birthday, a grainy shot of her in front of the first property she ever bought. A faded image of her mother, laughing on a porch just like this one. The front door opened. Ethan stepped in. Older now. A little grayer. But clearer somehow. He carried 2 bags of groceries and a bottle of wine. Hope you're not working too hard, he said as he stepped out onto the porch. I'm writing, Margaret said. That's different. He kissed her cheek, sat beside her. They didn't talk about Vanessa. They didn't need to. Ethan had signed the divorce papers 6 months ago. No drama. No fighting, just a quiet end to a loud chapter. He still worked, of course. Still showed up at meetings. But now he did it on his terms, no borrowed bravado, no titles he didn't understand. Just work that mattered, and a name that meant something again. They ate dinner on the porch. Nothing fancy. Roasted vegetables, warm bread, a little red wine. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the sky turned to fire. Margaret leaned back in her chair, eyes closed. This, she said, feels like mine. Ethan looked at her. It always was. A soft breeze passed through. She didn't need applause. She didn't need revenge. What she had was better, peace. Power. And the satisfaction of knowing that everything she'd built, even the parts they tried to erase, still stood. Not because she shouted. But because she knew. Margaret turned the page of her journal. And she kept writing.